Hi, everybody. Welcome to the International Women's Writing Guild's first webinar featuring Maureen Murdock on memoirists and the hazards and rewards of revealing family members. My name's Marge Hahn. I'm the communications coordinator, digital village coordinator for IWWG. I'm watching all the attendees joining us. And what would be really great before we begin and before I introduce Maureen is if I teach you a little bit of the functionality that you as computer attendees have. You have the functionality of talking to us through the chat room. Depending on the device you are accessing us on, the chat icon will be at the bottom of your screen, the left, the right, the top. I don't know, but nose around with your cursor and you'll find the chat. If you click on that, you will be able to open up a chat box inside of which you have options to type a message. You'll see a drop-down menu where your message will go to all panelists. And the panelists are Maureen and I. And then all panelists and attendees means it will go to Maureen and I and all of you attendees. And then you can also just chat with Maureen, I believe, unless that may just be an option for me. Negate that. I want to remind you that you as computer attendees can't be seen. You can't see yourself. You will only see Maureen and me, and you can't hear each other. So don't worry if you can't see yourself. Folks who are calling in, you have no functionality to talk to us. I apologize. That's the limitation of the software. You can hear Maureen and me, but you cannot communicate with us by any functionality. Press *8. There's no such functionality for this Zoom software if you are calling in. Some of you have already seen that there's a raise hand function. I'm going to ask you to not use the raise hand function because that would mean that I'd have to move you into panelist mode so that I can hear you. Please use the chat room to talk to us, and I'll do my best to be managing that while Maureen is presenting to you. Marge, can you see us even if we can't see you? No. So folks, I'm just going to remind you, I can't see you. You're not seeable. Only Maureen and I are seeable and hearable. Okay? One more reminder. If you're going to participate as a reader in our All Voices Open Mic following this event, you will be hearable and seeable because there's a functionality where I can move you into panelist mode, and you will find that quite groovy, but we're not going to be doing that here. You do want to sign up for the All Voices Open Mic. It is its own Zoom link, so you'll need to go to our events page at www.iwwg.org and go find All Voices Open Mic November and click on the registration link and sign up for that. Thanks for helping us test drive this software. We hope you feel that this is going to, help us stay in touch year-round and across the nation and the globe. One more thing I wanted to say, we will be having a Q&A for you to ask questions of Maureen. There is a Q&A function. You'll see it among your icons near the chat room, I believe, the Q&A. And if you click on that and ask a question, I'll get to that after Maureen presents. So don't worry about that. I'd rather please you use that for your questions rather than use the chat room, because the chat room is going to scroll, and pretty soon your question is going to be in my ceiling. So why don't you folks test drive the chat room by telling us where you're calling from, say hi, say, oh, thank you, I should tell you about my head adornment. Happy Dia de Muertos. I was able to wipe off the makeup from last night, but I am wearing this to celebrate our ancestors. All right, you all. Hi, Marie from Davie, Florida. Hi, Connecticut. Maureen, I hope you can see where our folks are saying hello from. Chicago.
Can they hear me too?
Yes, I believe so. Folks, remember to use the all panelists and attendees functionality. Click on that drop-down menu in the chat room above where you type and click on all panelists and attendees. Some of you are only speaking to Maureen and me because that's the default. You got to click on all panelists and attendees and then type in.
Wow, Nigeria,
Nigeria, yes.
Venezuela,
Oh, hello from Venezuela. Hi, Montana. Hi, Susan Hagen.
Iowa,
Um,
Montana, Boca Raton, Leeds, UK. Wow.
Kenya.
Nairobi.
Welcome. Thanks for getting up in the middle of the night.
Caitlin from Maine.
Yeah. Those of you who aren't seeing who Maureen and I are saying hello to, this chat room scrolls pretty fast up into your ceiling, so you just got to back up into it to find it. While we're doing that, folks, I'm going to introduce Maureen. I hope you read her beautiful bio in our registration information. I'm not a big fan of reading bios. I'll tell you a couple things you can do. Is you can go to www.maureenmurdock.com. I'm gonna type Maureen's website in the chat room, and so you can go check her out, check out her writings, her photography, her blog, all of that at her website. Maureen is the author of Unreliable Truth on Memoir and Memory. Maureen, did I get the subtitle right?
Yes, you did. You did.
I read that book a few months ago, and I highly recommend it. Maureen has a whole bunch of other books. She came on my radar when I found The Heroine's Journey, Maureen, in a used bookstore a long time ago.
That's good.
My radar before I ever met you. By way of introduction, I want to say that who Maureen is for me is
nice skull.
full-out woman, human who lives the truth of her life as a teacher, a writer, a mother. The kind of vulnerability we need to be bringing to the page as memoirists is who Maureen is. And on a personal note, Maureen opened up memoir for me. I'm a poet, but Maureen opened up that genre for me. So things that I could not find to say in a poem, I can now say in memoir vignettes at least.
That's great.
Yeah, Maureen, but thank you for that.
Oh, thank you.
So folks, I am going to be managing the chat room while Maureen presents for another 40 minutes or so. And again, if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A, and we'll be getting to those after Maureen's presentation. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, thanks, Marge. I'm really sorry I don't have a head ornament. If I knew you were going to wear one, I would have worn one too. I hope next webinar everybody wears a head ornament. So welcome. This is our first webinar, and the focus today is memoirists and the hazards and rewards of revealing family members. So you're going to notice that I'm going to be referring to my notes, and I'm also from time to time going to be holding up books that I refer to so that you can see their covers. And then at the end of my presentation, we'll have a book list up on the screen, as well as suggestions for writing memoirs about family members. So I'm going to start. Memoir often gets confused with autobiography and biography, as you probably already know. Memoir is not a linear autobiography recounting a fully lived life, but rather a selected aspect of the writer's life, written from his or her point of view. So rather than simply recounting an incident or a memory from her life, the memoirist both tells the story and tries to make meaning out of it. And the way I have really looked at memoir over the years, I started teaching memoir around 1993, 1994, and I've always been very interested in mythology, as many of you know. So I see memoir as contemporary myth, because most memoirs address the same themes of the domains of myth, which are: who am I? What's my tribe, or what's my family? what's my journey, and what's my purpose. I'm not saying all memoirs address those themes, but as you read memoirs, you'll find out people most of the time are talking about who am I, what's my journey, what my tribe is, and what's my purpose. So I think about memoir as a contemporary myth. So in terms of memoir, we're looking at what happened to me then and how did I react then? What insight do I have looking back upon a particular experience at a particular time in my life? There's always a then and a now, a then and a now. And self-reflection and insight are key to writing memoir. I'll repeat that. Self-reflection and insight are key to the writing of memoir. The memoir presupposes that there's a unity to human experience, that we all share similar hopes, dreams, and desires. And when a writer recounts a memory about herself, she's really talking about all of us to a certain degree. So the memoirist becomes a stand-in for your story or my story. The essence of memoir is to participate in the writer's struggle to achieve some understanding of the events, traumas, and triumphs of her personal recollection. So as you know, the job of writing memoir is to find one's truth, not to determine the facts of what happened. That's history, that's a testimony, perhaps even an interesting tale. I entitled my book that Marge mentioned, Unreliable Truth. I'm going to hold it up and see. Can you see it? Marge, can you see it?
Hold it up a little more, Maureen.
A little higher?
Mm-hmm. And Maureen, while you're doing that, I want to tell folks that if you're accessing us on your computer and you want the person who's speaking to be the one in the center, the larger face on the screen, you need to configure your video area. So go to your video icon, click on the upside down V, which is an arrow, and go to video settings, and there's a spotlight video function. I think that if you're not seeing Maureen as prominent when she speaks, it's because you need to set it to spotlight. All right, Maureen.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I entitled my book on memoir and memory, Unreliable Truth, because the author's exact memory may not be factually accurate, but what is important is what the author makes of her memory. So what is her emotional truth? As memoir writers, we have a contract with our readers to present the truth to the best of our recollection, with candidness, honesty, and insight. The specific details of an event may not matter as much as how the event impacted you. So when my book first came out, Unreliable Truth, it came out in 2003, I was at the American Booksellers Association, and this woman came up to me and said, "Why did you call it Unreliable Truth?" And I explained to her exactly what I just said to you, that it's the truth from the author's point of view. And she said, no, I have the truth. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, my brothers say it didn't happen that way, but I have the truth. And I said, are they writing memoirs too? And she said, no, I'm the one with the truth. And I said, well, if they were writing a memoir, they would be writing from their perspective, so it would be their emotional truth. You're writing a memoir from your perspective, so it's your emotional truth. That doesn't mean that what they say is not truthful either. And she said, no, I have the truth. Okay, so you have to be aware that if you're writing a memoir about a family member, they may say it didn't happen that way, but it did happen that way to you. The beauty of writing memoir is that the writer begins to understand his or her own life more fully. You cannot remain unaffected by reliving events that happened perhaps decades ago. Memoir offers the writer, and at times the reader, catharsis, new insights, new discoveries, and hopefully healing. When we tell our story and tell it well in a way that reflects the universal experience of being human, we become part of each other. So I think that's why memoir is so popular today, because we are creating a community of writers talking about their own lives. There's a wonderful book called Family Trouble. I'm going to hold this one up too. Let's see if you can see it. Family Trouble.
Maureen, back it up.
Back up?
Yeah, back up the book.
Back it up. Backing it up. How's that? Backing it up and lifting it up. Okay, good. Thank you. Family Trouble. It is a book on the hazards and rewards of revealing family. The editor is Joy Castro, and it's those of you who are really wanting to go into depth about this issue, I really suggest getting this book, because it's a compilation of memoirists' essays about what their experience was in writing about family. So there's an author in that book, Aaron Raslink, who writes, "There are stories powerful enough to shape our lives and our world, and they are often stories no one else has the power to tell. The only way to revise silence is to speak." Terry Tempest Williams, in the book When Women Were Birds, probably many of you have already read that. Marge, you'll have to let me know if it's okay. She writes, "I fear silence because it leads me to myself, a self I may not wish to confront. It asks that I listen. And in listening, I am taken to an unknown place. Silence leaves me alone in a place of feeling. It is not necessarily a place of comfort." Marge just mentioned to you that I'm going to be giving you a book list at the end of my talk. So Terry Tempest Williams' book will be on that. I want to repeat that last sentence. It is not necessarily a place of comfort. When you're writing memoir, you are remembering incidents that happened maybe 10, 20, 30, 50 years ago. Incidents in your life that perhaps were never processed. So in writing these incidents, these memories, feelings are going to come up. And sometimes it's just not very comfortable. And you have to be aware that that's part of the process. It takes courage to write memoir. So let's talk about writing about family. In writing about family members, we are also writing about culture, class, race, ethnicity, gender, place, sexual identity at a particular point in history. We're not a closed entity. The discipline of writing family stories is to make connections between history and culture and lived experience, and between that lived experience and your text. Excuse me. To connect personal experience and the written word is also to teach ourselves and one another that neither truth nor our text can be absolute. In other words, we can never be static. We are always changing. If family is the connecting link between private life and public history, then telling family stories means reimagining knowledge as the changing experiences of real people, rather than the universal pronouncements of abstract experts. Writing about one's family or intimates can be an aggressive, vindictive act, but it can also be a way of communicating something to loved ones that you never could before. In other words, a gift, the truth of your feelings. It can clear the air. So in writing about family, we practice the art of becoming flexible enough to encounter any situation, any story face to face. You, as the writer, have to become accountable. A writer working with family materials stands in a liminal space, and what I mean by that is an in-between space, kind of at a threshold, where my story meets your story, meets the reader's story, and becomes our story. That last sentence is a quote again from Aaron Raslink in Family Trouble. Dinty Moore, who also wrote in Family Trouble, in his essay, The Deeper End of the Quarry, writes, quote, "It is the writer's duty, I believe, to view the world with no filters over the eyes, no rose-colored glasses, distorting what is really seen, no glowing over the truth for the sakeness of politeness or propriety." He says, let the scales fall away. Okay, so what have been some memoirists' experiences? Writing about family members is not without risk. How can it be? Memoir writers are representing loved ones in shapes convenient to our own purpose, but perhaps false to their image of themselves. So many memoirists have alienated family members along the way. Poet Honor Moore, who's written this wonderful book, the Bishop's Daughter. I'm going to try holding it up again. Okay, Marge. Does that come across? Okay. That's The Bishop's Daughter by Honor Moore. She writes about her relationship with her father, Paul Moore Jr., the Episcopal Bishop of New York, soon after his death. The eldest of 9 children, Moore wrote The Bishop's Daughter, her memoir, not only about the defining issues of the time, such as war, race, family, and faith, but she also exposed the fact that her father was a secreted bisexual. She basically outed her father, which some of her siblings felt was unwarranted. After the New Yorker published an excerpt from the memoir, 3 of her siblings wrote a letter blasting her for exposing their father's most fervently held private life and damaging the legacy of their parents. But Moore wrote that his conflicts about his sexual nature had had a great influence on her growing up. And when she found out about his bisexuality as an adult, it helped her understand her own bisexuality. She writes, quote, "I came to understand that my own sexual development was inextricably tied up with my father's complicated erotic life, and I thought the story important for me to understand. As a writer, Moore wrote, quote, "Understanding meant telling. Understanding meant telling." She does not wrestle overtly with the ethics of outing her father, but felt that her own integrity was dependent on her writing the truth. And this really is true for all memoirists. Every memoirist has to make their own decision about writing the truth about family and friends. And we're going to talk about that later, some things you can think about. Susan Ito, who also wrote a piece in Family Trouble. Her piece was called "Living in Someone Else's Closet." Ito was adopted and writes about her search for her birth mother and what happened after she found her. But her birth mother didn't want her to write about her because she didn't want her current husband and their 2 children to know about her existence. The conditions of their ongoing relationship were that she not tell anyone known to her mother that she was her daughter, and that she not ask further questions about her birth father. If she crossed either line, she experienced an immediate freeze out. Susan's birth mother's taboo made her feel like she was living in somebody else's closet. That's why she titled her piece that. She writes, quote, "That has been my dilemma from the very beginning, needing to write, needing to affirm myself, to make real my own story, my very life, but being afraid to risk the loss of that relationship." She said, "I have struggled with that for years." 15 years later, she wrote her mother a letter telling her she was writing a book about their shared story and asked by name if her father was a particular man. She says, "I named names." What happened was she didn't hear from her mother for 6 years. She says, "Here I had spent over 15 years carefully tiptoeing around the landmines, trying not to upset her. But at the same time, I was carrying my own bomb in the form of a manuscript, and our relationship detonated." Her mother cut her off completely, and Susan grieved for years. Many years later, she reestablished her relationship with her mother, wrote a couple of nonfiction pieces, being careful never to use what adoption agencies refer to as identifying information. Her memoir remains unfinished, and her attitude now is, "My memoir will happen. Be patient." So to be able to create family members as full, believable characters requires great empathy, imagination, and patience. We must separate ourselves from relationships and recognize our relatives as human in weakness and in strength. Faith Adili, who wrote Meeting Faith, I'm going to hold that up. Wrote, "It was through researching sociological context and birthing my parents on the page that I was finally able to understand the volatile temper of a young white mother who raised me alone, the decisions of an idealistic Black father who left America without ever having seen me and chose post-colonial Africa over me again and again." The most startling story about the consequences of writing about a parent is in Sherman Alexie's memoir, "You Don't Have to Say You Love Me," which came out in June and is probably, for me, the most brilliant memoir I've ever read. You don't have to say you love me. But what happened for Alexei is that he started to feel like his mother has passed on. He started to feel like she was haunting him. He writes, "She was a complicated and difficult person. She was sometimes cruel and often cold. Yes, I loved her, but sometimes I hated her too. She was brilliant, funny, beautiful, generous, vindictive, deceitful, tender, manipulative, abusive, loving, and intimidating. She was one of the last fluent speakers of our tribal language and was a storyteller in Spokane and in English, but she did not tell Sherman her stories." And he tells us why. He says, "During the early years of my writing career, my mother was afraid to tell me family stories. She said, 'You're going to put things out there for everyone to read, ugly things.' And he did. So since he published his memoir, Alexei says his mother has haunted him, following him from city to city during his book tour, to the degree that he decided to cancel his book tour. He says, quote, 'My mother from the afterlife is metaphorically kicking my ass.' He even had a dream about her holding a construction sign that says, 'Stop.' So he did." So these examples are about writing about parents. What happens when we write about children? Some of you may know the book Beautiful Boy by David Sheff. Up, 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 Marge says. Okay, it's Beautiful Boy. And again, you're going to get these titles at the end of the webinar. Beautiful Boy, a father's journey through his son's addiction. What Sheff says is that he feels it's imperative to protect a loved one, particularly a child, and that outweighs the responsibility to tell the truth. Sheff said his son gave his approval in Beautiful Boy. He says, and this is a quote, "Nick, his son, from the beginning was encouraging and supportive. If there was anything anyone in the family objected to, I took it out. The suffering is so terrible, to add to that is unconscionable. I don't think we have carte blanche to tell even our own stories." In his mind, the imperative to protect a loved one, particularly a child, outweighs the responsibility to tell the truth. Now, Susan Cheever, memoirist and daughter of the autobiographical novelist John Cheever, disagrees. She writes, "I strongly believe everybody has the right to their own story, defining one's material as inclusive of the intersecting stories of family members." Then there's Julie Myerson, a British memoirist, who wrote, it's out of the screen, okay. She wrote The Lost Child, A Mother's Story. And she was pilloried in England as cruel, selfish, and manipulative for writing about her teenage son's descent into drug addiction from a strong strain of pot in the memoir Lost Child. Her son, Jake, who had originally said it was fine for her to write the story and had read part of it, when it came out, he denounced his mother as insane and obscene for exploiting and exaggerating the drug troubles that eventually led to his parents throwing him out when he was 17. Myerson says she's proud of the book, but added that had she known what a firestorm it would cause, she said, "I wouldn't have done it." She experienced a witch hunt. She says there's a big taboo about mothers. A bit of a witch burning was what it felt like. Cheever says the attacks on Meyerson probably would not have been so vehement if the author was a man. Michael Greenberg, who wrote about his own schizophrenic daughter in Hurry Down Sunshine, says, I do think that a mother is a very ripe target. So we have to ask ourselves why. Why is that? Perhaps it is because a mother writing about her child violates a cultural myth that a mother must do whatever she can do to protect her child. And another mother, Claire Fontaine, decided to deal with this issue by writing her memoir with her daughter. The book is called Come Back, A Mother and Daughter's Journey Through Hell and Back. So she solved the issue of writing about her daughter's substance abuse and recovery by writing the book with her daughter. So it's a memoir with two narrators, which is really an interesting book. The reader has the story from the mother's point of view as well as from the daughter's perspective. When they finished the book, they both decided to publish the book under pseudonyms to protect their identity. They were asked to do that by the lawyers for the publisher. They had already changed all of the identifying details of where they had lived. They changed it from the Midwest to Los Angeles, and they had changed the names of all of the people that were involved in the memoir. But the lawyers made that request. So let's get back to Hugh. My first question in working with memoirists is always, whose story is yours to tell? In my own book about my relationship with my son's bipolar illness and substance abuse, I had to grapple with this dilemma every day. I wanted to write a story about my relationship with my son, but at the same time, I was cautioned not to by the need to protect him. What judgment would I bring down upon him, upon me, upon us? What taboo would I break by speaking? Like Claire and Mia Fontaine, I considered publishing under a pseudonym. I tried to make art out of our lived experience, but sometimes writing about those experiences has real life consequences. Terry Tempest Williams reminds us, for a woman or a man to speak from the truth of their heart is to break taboo. Yet I felt like this was my story, the mother's story, and the mother's story often doesn't get told. I felt that I was in a unique position as a mother to write about my experience of dealing with his illness and substance abuse, not only from the point of view of a mother, but also from the point of view of a mental health professional, because I'm a therapist. There are memoirs written by fathers about their child's addiction or mental illness, but not a lot by mothers. And the truth is, for the most part, mother is the family member who has to deal with getting treatment for her child. So people who are writing memoirs to embarrass family members are always wrong. But I always come back to whose story is yours to tell. If it's your story to tell, then you have to tell the truth. And at the same time, you have to be careful about other people's reputations. There are things we can do as memoirists. We used to just be able to change names and identifying characteristics, but that's really not enough anymore. Social media has made it possible to find out a person's true identity. And if you can identify the person, the rule is absolute, meaning they could bring a suit against you. You do have greater latitude in writing about a public figure. So in terms of personal ethics, have you presented a responsible discussion of the other person's point of view? Unfortunately, lots of times that gets left out in memoir, and that's really something that we all have to think about. If you are writing about living persons, what's your motivation? We're always responsible for any pain our words might cause another, but we don't always know what will cause offense. Philip LePate writes, I have written, this is a quote, I have written somewhat negatively about people who ignored the main substance of my critique, but pounced with outrage on some picayune detail that they thought I got wrong. I have written glowingly about people who took it amiss because they didn't think they got enough attention in my piece. So the truth is, you can't win. LePate says that some writers show their manuscript to the person being written about and asking if he or she objects to anything. He says he could never do that himself. He doesn't want to give that person such power. Once you invite people to make changes, they will. He feels that it's his moral dilemma, not theirs. Giving the reader the option to revise his memoir would be like shifting the ethical burden onto them. So my question to you is, what is your purpose in writing your memoir? That question always has to be explored. That's why a lot of people will write their memoir and then decide at the end, well, I don't really want to publish this. Maybe my motivation wasn't as pure as I thought it was. Maybe I was even trying to get back at someone. Or maybe I just needed to write it to heal myself. So what I'd like to do right now, Marge, is to put up on screen some of the suggestions that I've written about writing about loved ones. So can you do that? Or can I do that?
I'm doing that, Maureen, and as I do it, folks, I want to remind you that depending on the device you're accessing this on, you may not see it. It may be an imperfect visual for you. So I also now, because this is big on my screen, can't see the chat room. So if you're having issues, I won't be able to address them.
Okay, so the we don't have the top of the, okay, great.
Yep.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I'm going to be reading it. So for those of you who can't see the screen, I'll read slowly. So writing about loved ones and family members. What is important is that you write your story. Get it down. You won't know whether you want to show it to anyone else until after you write it. So forget about publishing. Just get your story down. Writing it will change you. In the best of circumstances, it may heal you. You have some options to consider as you write about family members or friends. Number one, show the person what you have written, but don't show it to them mid-process. You may have changed your perception about them or about the incident that occurred between you by the time you finish your piece. Never write to settle scores. Now, you just heard me say to you that Philip LePate would not agree with that, but a lot of memoirs do this. They show what they have written to the person that they're writing about. Number 2, change names and identifying details. Let them choose their pseudonyms. As I mentioned to you about the Fontaines in Comeback, they changed their names, they changed the doctor's names, she changed her ex-husband's name, and they also changed the geographical location. 3, don't tell the story until the person is dead. I had a student from UCLA who wrote her book for 9 years, and she was waiting for her father and her ex-husband to die before she published the book. She was willing to wait. Now, of course, as I told you, Honor Moore found out with her siblings that that doesn't necessarily mollify the survivors. My favorite advice comes from Philip LePate in his article on the ethics of writing about others. He says, 1, befriend only people who are too poor to hire lawyers to sue you. 2, if you plan to write about friendship, make lots of friends because you are bound to lose a few. And 3, for the same reason, try to come from a large family. I love his sense of humor. So here are Mary Karr's rules for dealing with others, excuse me, in her book, The Art of Memoir. She says, 1, notify subjects in advance, detailing parts that might make them wince. 2, don't show pages to anybody mid-process. You want them to see your best work. 3, if you're writing about somebody you hate, do it with great love. 4, never speak with authority about how people feel or what their motives were. That's really, really important. You cannot get inside another person's head. 5, if somebody's opinion of what happened wholly opposes hers, she mentions it in passing without feeling obliged to represent it. I noticed that in Liars Club. She would every once in a while say, my sister would disagree with this. But she didn't represent her sister's opinion. 6, don't use jargon to describe people. She never called her parents alcoholics. She showed herself pouring vodka down the sink. 7, let your friends choose their pseudonyms. 8, consider how your views, especially the harsh ones, may be wrong and correct as needed. 9, you might want to sit with your closest friends and family members as they read touching material. She actually said you don't have to sit in the same room. 10, cut out anything that someone flat out denies. 11, let the reader know how subjective your point of view is. You can write from my point of view, such and such, or the way I remember it is, such and such. So those are some suggestions about writing about family members. And Marge, we could take the questions now, or we could put the book titles up. What would you?
And Maureen, we do have a question. Will folks, I think it makes sense that I'll be sending these documents to the registrants after the webinar. They'll get a copy of the book list and also those notes?
The notes that I just read? Yeah. Not my whole lecture, but
not the lecture. Yeah. So folks, yes, those are handouts. Maureen is very generous with her handouts whenever she teaches. So I'll be sending to all the registrants a copy of what Maureen just read and the book list, but not her lecture. That's hers.
Yeah.
So, folks, Maureen, I'm going to share the book list then now.
Okay.
Is that what you'd like? Yeah. And folks, start thinking about your questions for the Q&A because we're going to be moving in that direction. And again, the Q&A is going to be around the area where the chat room icon is, depending on your device. Mine on a PC is at the bottom.
Okay, so I'll read through the book titles. I mentioned to you Beautiful Boy by David Sheff, where he writes about his son Nick's meth addiction. I want to say one thing about that book. I mean, it's just a beautiful book. His son decided to write his own memoir in response to David's book. So for a while they were doing book tours on both David's book, Beautiful Boy, and Nick's book, which was called Tweaked. Okay, The Bishop's Daughter by Honor Moore, Blinded by Hope, Meg McGuire, Come Back, A Mother and Daughter's Journey Through Hell and Back by Claire and Mia Fontaine, Family Trouble, that was the book that I told you has many essays by memoirists about the hazards and rewards of revealing family. Hurry Down Sunshine by Michael Greenberg. And that's the book about, I just mentioned that in passing, that's a book about his daughter's schizophrenia. The Lost Child by Julie Meyerson, that's the one about the British author who felt at the end of the experience that if she had to do it again, she wouldn't. Meeting Faith Adili, who writes about the fact that her white mother raised her. Her father was an African-American who never saw her. Unreliable Truth, my own book about memoir and memory. When Women Were Birds by Terry Tempest Williams. And You Don't Have to Say You Love Me by Sherman Alexie. That's the book I mentioned to you that Sherman Alexie left his book tour because he felt like he was being haunted by his mother. So at this point, Marge, we can take questions.
Great. So Maureen, I'm going to, first, I'm going to start with Pauline's question. She's on a device where she may not be able to get the Q&A, so I'm finding this in the chat room. But folks, again, if you have the Q&A function on your device, please use that so I don't lose track of your question. Yeah, I'm going to just say that again, folks. Please use the Q&A for your questions. Unless your device, you can't find the Q&A. I'm not going to be able to track the volume of questions scrolling up into my ceiling, okay? So from Pauline, let me find it.
Marge,
yes.
should I click Q&A?
No, Maureen, I got it. I want you to focus.
Okay. Okay.
I got you covered. So
thank you.
I'm just going to read verbatim, Pauline. I wrote a book about my experience in a man's field. I was told by an agent that I needed to write it as fiction because no one would believe it, but a book of lies as truth, what gives?
Well, they would believe it now if they're paying any attention to what's going on in the news. It sounds like you only had an experience with one agent. If that's correct, I would take it to another agent. When people say nobody's going to believe that, I absolutely don't agree with it. So don't let that stop you. Find another agent.
Thanks, Maureen. Another question. Caitlin, I got you in the chat room. Hi, Maureen. You said it can be good to present a responsible discussion of the other person's point of view. Can you think of a book and or passage that does this well as an example? It seems like it could get clunky to try to present both sides to a given scene or issue, even if done briefly.
I think it can be done very briefly, maybe one or two sentences, nothing more than that. I'm pretty sure that I can't quote a passage right now, but I would look at Mary Carr's book Lit, where she has presented her mother's point of view in dialogue with her. That's one way to do it. in terms of when I was writing my own book, I had a perception of something that went on for my son in college. And he had painted and sculpted and drawn 400 bananas. And at the time that I saw that, when I went to his studio, I said something about him, it being a mania of bananas. And he said, Mom, I wasn't having an experience of mania. In fact, I was depressed. But at the beginning of the school year, the teacher had said, choose one object and paint it, sculpt it, whatever you do, but stick with one object. And he said, I chose bananas because they change shape, they curl, they change color. And so I put that in terms of dialogue, because he was telling me what the truth was, and I was coming from a place of misperception. I don't know whether that helps.
Maureen?
Yeah.
I'm in the Q&A. We've got 5 questions so far. Thank you, everyone, for this engaging in this conversation. It's rich, Maureen. From Louise Stowe-Johns, I am writing a memoir of my connection as a pastor with a woman who was on death row. She has given me letters from friends. She does not want them back. If I quote from one of the letters, should I preserve the letter? In general, what resources should I keep? Letters from the woman to me, etc.
So when the question is, what should I keep to preserve? Or I'm not quite understanding the question. The woman on death row doesn't want the questions back.
Letters, right. If I quote from one of the letters, should I preserve the letter? In general, what sources should I keep? Resources.
I would preserve the letter certainly until the book is published.
Mm-hmm.
Who is this again? Who's asking?
Louise, and
Louise. Okay.
If we don't answer your question, please feel free to follow up in the Q&A.
Okay. Louise, I guess my question to you is, do you have her written permission to use the letters? I mean, I think that's the key question. If you do have her written permission to excerpt from the letters, I still would keep them definitely until after the book is published. Yeah, I guess I'd want to know, what else would you do with them?
Yeah. Thanks, Maureen. Susan Hagen, are these people self-published, or do they all have a publisher? I'm assuming from your book list, Maureen, the people you've quoted. This is also helpful. Thank you for sharing with us. So are most of the folks you've excerpted or mentioned self-published, or they had a publisher?
They all had publishers.
Mm-hmm. Jeanette Lavoie, guilt, writing about my son's depression and suicide. The mother must get help for her child. He resisted, and people hold me responsible. Any words of wisdom?
Is she saying that people hold her responsible for his suicide? Is that what she's saying?
Getting help.
I'm sorry?
That he resisted getting help is how I'm understanding Jeanette's question.
Well, if that's the truth of her experience, then that's what she's writing. It doesn't mean that the reader is going to hold the mother responsible or not responsible. We have no power over how a reader receives our work. it sounds like it's important for you to write that book for your own healing. So if I were you, I would just focus on that and not focus on who's going to read it and are they going to hold you responsible. I mean, that's a terrible idea that a reader would hold the mother responsible for her child's suicide. So if I were you, I wouldn't focus on that, just focus on your own healing. And I'm really sorry about your son.
Maureen from Elsa Sanguino. And folks, if I mispronounce your name, forgive me.
Hmm.
Short stories could be a good way to structure memoir, Maureen?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. In terms of vignettes, there's several authors that do that. The one that comes to my mind right away is Abigail Thomas, who wrote Safekeeping. She's a good one to look at. Well, yeah, look at all of her books. She's got 3 memoirs out. I think the Safekeeping is the first. The second one is Three Dog Life, not 3 Dog Night. And the third book is What Comes Next and How to Deal with It. She's basically, the first book is about the 70s, 1970s. The second book is probably 80s, 90s. And the third book is the 2000s. So yes, absolutely. I would say in the past, most people said no, try to make it a whole book-length memoir, but more and more people are doing memoirs as short pieces.
Maureen, could I hold up a couple that I've discovered too?
Sure.
This is Julie Marie Wade's Wishbone. Oh, folks, I don't know if mine is mirrored or not. That's a setting that I should have pre-done.
It looks good.
Yeah, Wishbone, and the subtitle is A Memoir in Fractures. I have to say that I, as a poet who deals in fracture in small bits, loves these ways of shaping narrative. And then another one, Confessions of a Left-Handed Man by Peter Selgin, an artist's memoir. This is in essays. This guy actually was a writing mentor for Dixie King, our previous executive director. So FYI about that.
As we're talking about this, the wonderful thing about Sherman Alexie's book, the one that I mentioned before, which is You Don't Have to Love Me, he combines within the book, he combines poetry and prose. So you'll be reading along, some of it is in poetry and it works beautifully, and then some of it is in prose. So memoirists have become much more experimental in the last couple of years.
Thank you, Maureen. Chandra Miller has a question. I just received feedback from a professional editor on my work in progress, which links my healing journey to the fictionalized stories from a 19th century women's mental institution.
That's right, yeah.
The editor asks me to include details of my home life, including the impact of the illness on our sex life. Neither my wife nor I are comfortable with that, but maybe there's a way to do it without feeling exposed. Any advice or good examples of this done sensitively?
If you're not comfortable doing it, I wouldn't do it. I mean, that's, what's the purpose? I guess my question, Chandra, would be, what's her purpose in asking you to do that?
Yeah, so Chandra, if you want to do a follow-up question, Maureen, do you have more to say about that? Should I go to the next question, then I'll track Chandra when she appears in the Q&A again?
Well, I mean, the writer has to be comfortable writing what she's writing. And if there's a really good reason to do that, then yeah, she's got to find a way. But Chandra is saying that she and her partner are not comfortable. So I'd stay with that. I would tell the agent or the editor, that's not where I want to go in this book, unless you tell me what the purpose is and how it moves the story forward. Chandra, I remember you're talking to me about in the summer about this book, and it's such an exciting book, just the way it is, from what you've said. The other thing, though, let me just mention Lost Child again, because Julie Meyerson did combine her memoir with with research that she was doing about someone in the 1800s. So it's again a combination in the sense of memoir and fiction, memoir and fiction, memoir and fiction. So if I were you, I would take a look at that, but don't write things that you're not comfortable with.
And Maureen, Chandra did follow up. She wants to see how we coped with the illness, the impact of it. She also thinks the narrator will be more relatable with the inclusion of more home life info. And thanks so much for that. Yeah, she likes what you said.
Okay. I don't know what else to add except stay within. There's sometimes that it's good to push your comfort zone, but if it's both you and your partner are saying you're not comfortable with it, so leave it out.
From Robin Plant, if your memoir is based on an event that was in the newspaper, a family murder, does referencing quotes from these articles need permission from sources? Any advice for writing about a tragic event that was publicized?
Use quotation marks, give credit. No, you don't have to. I mean, it's in the public domain, but make sure you use quotation marks and citations.
Thanks, Maureen. Kapana Gege from Liberia. Welcome from Liberia, Kapana.
That's great.
Yeah. Kapana asks, I didn't mention in my book about how my mother's blood sister maltreated us and how I nearly got sexually abused by her husband. Though I've explained part of her sister's maltreatment of us, I have not, and decided I'll not tell my mother about the other side of it. So I couldn't write about it. I don't want to hurt their relationship in any way, so I decided to let it go. In the end, I told my publisher to scrap the entire portion. And the point is, everyone involved is alive. How do you think I should have gone about writing about those things?
I think you did what was the most comfortable for you. I think you respected your mother and aunt's relationship, and I think you made a wise choice. I mean, I have a lot of respect for the way that you handled it. I guess my question is, do you feel like you lost anything in taking that out?
Yeah, Kapana, so if you want to address that question in the Q&A, did you lose anything by leaving it out as the teller of that story? Maureen from Joan McKay, how do I deal with the fact that I loved one sister more than I loved the others?
In writing or in life? Well, I guess when you say, how do I deal with it, it's probably going to come through in your writing. I guess my question is, do you show that in dialogue? Do you show that in the scenes that you have with your sister? Are you worried about hurting your other sister? I guess you are, or else you wouldn't have brought up the question. I guess one way to do it is to sit down with your sister and say, I've always had a closer relationship with my other sister, and I want you to know that doesn't mean I love you less, but I've chosen to write my memoir in a particular way, and I really hope it doesn't hurt your feelings. I mean, that's the only thing I can really think about, unless you're going to write fiction.
From Susan Hagen, Maureen, I am writing a memoir that is about growing up with several deaths. My mother died when I was 9, and it was many years later before I realized I was suffering from her death. And at that time, there was nothing written on the death of a mother, so I sent out an ad and had over 90 respondents.
Wow.
Back in 1992, so I've been following my healing for many years. Can I take quotes from the many letters I received without using names and just saying motherless daughter? It might be a 2 or 3 sentence.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Why is that, Maureen?
Why can she quote without using a name?
Without worrying about quoting and not citing. Yeah, but without getting permission from those women.
Oh, I didn't realize that was the question.
It's not, it isn't, but I wonder if it is. Can I take quotes from the many letters I received without using names and just saying motherless daughter? And I think I would add, and without getting their permission. That may be in the subtext.
Well, if she wants to do the work of getting their permissions, that's one thing. But she's saying that she's had these letters for what it seems like 20 years.
1992.
Yeah, trying to track people down is a lot of work.
Yeah.
I would say use the quotes and say motherless daughters. She could always say motherless daughter from Detroit, motherless daughter from Cincinnati. A letter I received in 1992 from a motherless daughter in California. I think having to go to the trouble of tracking everyone down, if she wants to do that, that would be in a lot of integrity. The other thing she could do in the author's note in the beginning of the book, say, while I was doing research on this book, I received hundreds of letters from motherless daughters in which I will quote in this book without naming names. So, I mean, she could put that in her author's note.
Thanks, Maureen. Folks, I want to say we have 2 more minutes. And then I'm going to have to dash to the other webinar for the All Voices Open Mic. I realized that maybe I should have built in 15 minutes between. So I apologize for that. If you want to be in the All Voices Open Mic as a listener, it's its own Zoom URL. And so go to the events page at iwwg.org and register. It'll be free and easy and casual, okay? I'm gonna look at the remaining questions. Maureen, from Holly Rose, a comment, I read Unreliable Truth, found it very valuable. Thank you for that. In it, you speak the power and value of remembering the things we need to do to write our truth. Have you any thoughts about having voluminous and detailed journals, and might that be a detriment?
I actually think it's a help, because if you're writing daily, I mean, if you've got voluminous journals, it sounds like you're probably writing daily. So you are priming your memory pump every day. So I don't see it as a detriment. Maybe once a year or twice a year or several times a year, go through the journal and pull out ideas that you want to follow in terms of memories that are juicy to you that you want to explore. But I really don't see it as a detriment.
She's wondering, Maureen, if she's missing something vital because she's not digging through her brain. but actually through the journals.
Yeah, but once you dig through the journal, you're going to be digging through your brain. It sounds to me like what you're saying is I would prefer not to be writing voluminous journals, but that's a choice. I think once you go back into the journal, start to pull out, see if you can find patterns in your life that repeat over and over. Pull those out and then write about those.
Mm-hmm. Maureen, I'm going to do a very efficient collapsing of the remaining questions and comments. Folks want to know if they can email you after the webinar, and my guess is yes, to do so at your website.
I'd rather them email me at murdockmaureen@gmail.com.
All right, folks, I'm putting that in the chat room. It's murdockmaureen@gmail.com.
Right, and I'll stay online maybe for another half hour, and that's it.
Oh, right now, Maureen, Maureen, that's doable because I've made you co-host. I have to go to the All Voices open mic. So let me just wrap this up here.
And then I'll get on my email.
Oh, okay. So, got it, Maureen. I hear what you're saying. If people right now want to be emailing Maureen, she can email with you in real, back and forth now. Kapana said, I didn't feel it, but my editor thought so, especially the sexual abuse attempt. He thought she should have spoken out, following up on the protecting of the sister-mother relationship. Thanks for following up, Kapana. The question about those letters, Maureen, from the death row, someone could question my source or accuracy. If I have the documents, then I could prove what I wrote. So my question is, should I maintain the source? Perhaps this is connected, Maureen. If it is our perspective, we would not stating that in the book qualify the materials without legal action.
Yes.
Okay, good.
But I want to say something really quick, and I know you have to go. My advice is always have a literary attorney vet your manuscript, so that I'm not an attorney and you just want to protect yourself.
Great. Thank you, Maureen. Folks,
thank you.
These follow-up comments and thank yous, and I would prefer you put that, if you could, in the chat room so Maureen can see it too. I'm the one managing the Q&A. Did we get that answered about the letters, Maureen? If I have the documents, the letters, then I could prove what I wrote. So, yeah, it sounds like yes, Louise. Keep your sources. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Keep
All
your
right.
sources and have your manuscript vetted by a literary attorney.
Yeah. Thank you so much, folks, for your comments. Please put them in the chat room, not the Q&A. Please put your thank yous to each other, goodbyes. Thanks so much, y'all. I'm sorry to dash Maureen Murdock, author of Reliable Truth on Memoir and Memory. And all her other books are at her website, MaureenMurdock.com. Anything left to say, Maureen?
Thank you, Marge. You're a wonderful host. This has been a great experiment, and hopefully we'll do more in the future. Go ahead, Dash.
Happy Dia de los Muertos, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.